Existence and Existents by Emmanuel Levinas. Quotes. Existence and Existents by Emmanuel Levinas is a foundational work that explores the relationship between individual beings and the act of existing itself. Levinas delves into themes such as the anonymity of existence, the struggle to emerge from mere being, and the notion of the there is, which describes the persistence of being beyond the dissolution of individual entities. This book serves as a meditation on the nature of being and consciousness, offering insights into the difficulty of distinguishing between existence and the entities that occupy it. Levinas challenges traditional Western metaphysics by focusing on the impersonal character of existence and the inherent struggle involved in the emergence of individual consciousness. Quote 1. The distinction between that which exists and its existence itself, between the individual, the genus, the collective, God, beings designated by substantives, and the event or act of their existence imposes itself upon philosophical reflection, and with equal facility disappears from its view. This quote addresses the challenge of distinguishing between being as a concept and the individual entities that embody it. It suggests that while philosophy attempts to separate these ideas, the distinction can easily fade. Existence itself, as a concept, becomes elusive when viewed through the lens of individual beings, leading thought to confuse the essence of existence with the beings that exist. Quote 2. Thought slips imperceptibly from the notion of being qua being, that by virtue of which an existing being exists, to the idea of a cause of existence, a being in general, a God whose essence will indeed contain existence, but which will nonetheless be a being, and not the deed, activity, pure event, or work of being. This passage highlights the philosophical difficulty of maintaining a focus on the pure concept of being without shifting towards a search for a cause or higher being. The transition from considering existence itself to identifying a cause, such as God, results in a loss of focus on the active process or event of being, reducing it to a static entity. Quote 3. The difficulty of separating being from beings and the tendency to envisage the one in the other are not accidental. They are due to the habit of situating the instant, the atom of time, outside of any event. Levinas argues that the challenge in distinguishing being from individual beings arises from a deeper issue: our tendency to isolate moments of time from the events that occur within them. This habit leads to confusion, as it assumes that being and beings are independent, when in fact they are intertwined, shaped by the very flow of time and existence. Quote 4. What is the event of being in general, detached from beings which dominate it? What does its generality mean? Levinas poses a critical question here, asking how we can conceive of being as a concept detached from the individual beings that seem to dominate our understanding of it. This inquiry challenges the reader to reflect on the abstract, impersonal nature of being and its relationship to the particular entities we encounter. Quote 5. The preoccupation with this relationship between the self and its existence appearing as a burden to be taken up, becomes particularly poignant in certain situations which philosophical analysis habitually leaves to psychology, but which we shall pay particular attention to: fatigue and indolence. This quote brings attention to the subjective experience of existence, specifically through feelings of fatigue and laziness. Levinas suggests that these states reveal a deeper existential struggle, as existence itself can feel like a burden that one must constantly bear. These everyday experiences, often left to psychology, offer rich insight into the nature of being. Quote 6. We shall try to contest the idea that evil is defect. Does being contain no other vice than its limitation and nothingness? Levinas challenges the traditional notion that evil is merely a deficiency or lack of being. He raises the question of whether evil might have a more fundamental presence within existence itself, beyond just the concept of limitation or absence. This shift reframes the philosophical discourse on evil as something potentially intrinsic to the very structure of being. Quote 7. The rift between the rational order and events, the mutual impenetrability of minds opaque as matter, the multiplication of logical systems each of which is absurd for the others, the impossibility of the I rejoining the you, and consequently the unfitness of understanding for what should be its essential function. These are things we run up against in the twilight of a world. This passage describes a profound disconnection between individual human experiences, logic, and understanding. Levinas emphasizes the fragmentation of human existence, where different systems of thought become incompatible, and where individuals find it increasingly difficult to connect with one another, leading to existential isolation. This breakdown of communication and comprehension mirrors a larger sense of disorientation within the world. Quote 8. Existence is not synonymous with the relationship with a world. It is antecedent to the world. In the situation of an end of the world, the primary relationship which binds us to being becomes palpable. Levinas suggests that existence itself precedes any relationship we have with the world. In moments of profound crisis, such as an end-of-the-world situation, our connection to the very fact of being, independent of our surroundings, becomes most apparent. It is in these moments that the fundamental nature of existence, outside of external realities, reveals itself. Quote 9. The conquest of being continually recommences, as though it took place in Cartesian time, at discrete instants each of which issues out of nothingness. This quote emphasizes the ongoing nature of existence, likening it to a process that continuously begins anew. Levinas draws a parallel with Cartesian time, suggesting that each moment of existence is a fresh emergence from nothingness, highlighting the perpetual nature of the struggle to affirm and sustain being. Quote 10. The questioning of being is an experience of being in its strangeness. It is then a way of taking up being. That is why the question about being, what is being, has never been answered. Levinas presents the questioning of being as an essential part of human existence. He explains that the very act of asking what being is constitutes an engagement with its mystery. The impossibility of answering this question reflects the fundamental alien nature of existence itself, which cannot be fully comprehended or resolved. Quote 11. There exists a weariness which is a weariness of everything and everyone, and above all, a weariness of oneself. Levinas points to a deep existential fatigue, one that transcends simple tiredness. This weariness reflects a profound disillusionment with life and with oneself. It is not merely a reaction to external circumstances, but an exhaustion rooted in the very act of existing, revealing a refusal or inability to continue engaging with the demands of life. In quote 12, indolence concerns beginning, as though existence were not there right off, but pre-existed the beginning in an inhibition. Here, Levinas describes indolence as an existential state that prevents action from beginning. It reflects a hesitation to engage with life or existence, suggesting that this reluctance is not born from external obstacles, but from an internal inhibition that exists prior to the actual start of any activity. Quote 13. Indolence is an impotent and joyless aversion to the burden of existence itself. It is a being afraid to live, which is nevertheless a life, in which the fear of the unaccustomed, adventure, the unknown, is a repugnance devolving from the aversion for the enterprise of existence. This quote illustrates indolence as a state where one withdraws from the demands and challenges of life. Although life continues, there is a deep fear of the uncertainties and adventures that come with it. Indolence reflects an inability to face existence and the inherent burden it carries, resulting in a passive rejection of life's responsibilities. Quote 14. The numbness of fatigue is a telling characteristic. It is an impossibility of following through, a constant and increasing lag between being and what it remains attached to, like a hand little by little letting slip what it is trying to hold on to. Levinas describes fatigue as an experience of growing disconnection, where one's efforts begin to slip away despite trying to maintain them. Fatigue is not just physical, but represents an existential struggle, an increasing distance between oneself and the act of being, as if the self is unable to keep up with the demands of existence. Quote 15. Effort lurches out of fatigue and falls back into fatigue. What we call the tension of effort is made up of this duality of upsurge and fatigue. Here, Levinas explains that effort is an ongoing cycle of emerging from fatigue only to fall back into it. The tension in effort is a dynamic interplay between the drive to move forward and the inevitable return to fatigue, a continual struggle that defines the nature of effort. Quote 16. To be weary is to be weary of being. This is so prior to interpretation. The concrete plenitude of fatigue has this form. Levinas points to the idea that weariness is not just a result of physical exertion, but a deeper, more profound fatigue with existence itself. This weariness arises naturally from the condition of being, and exists before any attempt to explain or interpret it, making it a fundamental experience of life. Quote 17. Effort is hence a condemnation, because it takes up an instant as an inevitable present. It is an impossibility of disengaging itself from the eternity upon which it has opened. In this passage, Levinas suggests that effort is a form of condemnation, because it binds the individual to the present moment, making it impossible to escape the continuous flow of time. Effort is inescapable because it locks us into the present, with its endless connection to eternity, reflecting the weight of existence. Quote 18. Fatigue is, to be sure, not a cancellation of one's contract with being. The delay it involves is nonetheless an inscription in existence. But what is peculiar to this inscription, its sort of hesitation, enables us to surprise it, to catch sight of the operation of assuming which the existence that is taken up already always involves. Levinas explains that fatigue does not sever one's relationship with being. Rather, it reveals a delay, a hesitation in existence itself. This moment of pause allows us to glimpse the fundamental nature of existence, the act of assuming being, which always underlies the process of living. Fatigue thus becomes a window into understanding the dynamics of existence. Quote 19. To take up an instant through effort does not, of itself, found the relationship between the I and the world. Levinas begins by distinguishing between effort, which binds us to the present moment, and the broader relationship between the individual and the world. He suggests that while effort may connect us to existence, it does not necessarily establish a connection with the world of objects and things, which require a different type of engagement. Quote 20. To be in the world is to be attached to things. Théophile Gautier's line, "I am one of those for whom the external world exists," expresses that joyous appetite for things which constitutes being in the world. Here, Levinas explains that being in the world is defined by a relationship with objects. The external world becomes meaningful through our desires and attachments to things. This joyous attachment is a fundamental aspect of existence, emphasizing that to live in the world is to be drawn toward and engage with the objects around us. Quote 21. Desire has no further intentions behind it, which would be like thoughts. It is a good will. All the rest belongs to the level of biology. Levinas characterizes desire as a pure, straightforward force, without any hidden or ulterior motives. Desire, in its simplicity, seeks only the object that satisfies it. This statement underscores the directness of human desires, separating them from deeper existential concerns, which Levinas implies belong to another realm of thought. Quote 22. The couple being and value is in fact not at all an antithesis. The reality of a thing is indeed constituted by its finality. This quote suggests that existence and value are not opposites, but are intertwined. Levinas argues that the reality of any object is shaped by its purpose or end. In other words, things have significance because they fulfill a function or satisfy a desire, making their existence inseparable from the value they provide. Quote 23. To be in the world is precisely to be freed from the last implications of the instinct to exist, from all the depths of the ego which never will divest itself of its masks and whose positions are all poses. Levinas explains that being in the world allows an individual to transcend the purely instinctual aspects of existence and the depths of the self. In the world, one moves beyond existential anxiety and the performative nature of identity, engaging with the world sincerely and without pretense. Quote 24. Light makes possible, then, this enveloping of the exterior by the inward, which is the very structure of the cogito and of sense. Here, Levinas ties light to the process of understanding and consciousness. Light enables the inward self to grasp and envelop the external world, forming the foundation of thought and meaning. This relationship between light and cognition is essential for the way humans make sense of their surroundings. Quote 25. Existence in the world qua light, which makes desire possible, is, then, in the midst of being, the possibility of detaching oneself from being. Levinas argues that light, which allows for perception and knowledge, also provides the ability to distance oneself from mere existence. Through this perception, humans can step back from their raw being and engage with the world on a level of thought and desire, thus offering a form of freedom from the constraints of existence. Quote 26. In our relationship with the world, we are able to withdraw from the world. Levinas begins by noting that human beings have the capacity to step back from their engagement with the world, suggesting that while we live and act within the world, there is an ability to distance ourselves from its objects and concerns. This withdrawal highlights the tension between immersion in the world and the capacity to disengage. Quote 27. Art makes them stand out from the world, and thus extracts them from this belongingness to a subject. Levinas describes how art has the power to lift objects out of their usual context, separating them from their immediate relation to human use or understanding. Art reframes objects in such a way that their alterity or strangeness becomes apparent, offering a new perspective that removes them from the ordinary flow of existence. Quote 28. The movement of art consists in leaving the level of perception so as to reinstate sensation, in detaching the quality from this object reference. Levinas explains that art shifts from representing objects as they are typically perceived and instead focuses on the raw sensation of qualities, such as colors or sounds, without connecting them directly to any specific object. This allows art to reveal the sensory experience in a pure form, detached from its usual referential framework. Quote 29. There is a swarming of points. In this brief, powerful quote, Levinas evokes the chaotic, unsettling experience of the night, where points of reference dissolve, leaving only a disorienting multitude of isolated elements. This description captures the way in which familiar structures of understanding break down in the face of the unknown, leading to a sense of overwhelming uncertainty. Quote 30. The rustling of the there is horror. Levinas uses this evocative phrase to describe the unnerving presence of existence itself, when all familiar markers of reality have disappeared. In this moment, existence becomes an impersonal, oppressive force, manifesting as an inescapable presence that induces a deep sense of horror, especially in the stillness and silence of the night. Quote 31. Horror is nowise an anxiety about death. Levinas distinguishes horror from the fear of death, arguing that horror is not concerned with the end of life, but with the overwhelming, impersonal force of existence itself. In horror, the individual is not facing a personal end, but is engulfed by the endless, anonymous continuation of being, which strips away subjectivity and leaves only a suffocating presence. Quote 32. Horror carries out the condemnation to perpetual reality, to existence with no exits. Levinas explains that horror represents a kind of eternal entrapment within existence, where there is no escape from being. This sense of being condemned to an unending reality without any possibility of release defines the profound and inescapable nature of horror, as it locks the individual into the relentless continuation of life without resolution. Quote 33. The impossibility of rending the invading, inevitable, and anonymous rustling of existence manifests itself particularly in certain times, when sleep evades our appeal. Levinas describes the experience of insomnia as an encounter with the unrelenting presence of existence. In this state, one cannot escape the oppressive fact of being, which persists even when there is no immediate reason to remain awake. This rustling presence of existence, which cannot be broken or forgotten, becomes inescapable in moments when sleep is elusive. Quote 34. It is the reawakening of the there is in the heart of negation. It is an indefectibility of being, where the work of being never lets up. It is its insomnia. Levinas speaks of insomnia as more than a personal experience. It is the persistence of existence itself, which cannot be negated or escaped. Even when one tries to withdraw from being, existence reasserts itself in this relentless form. Insomnia, then, represents the tireless nature of being, which never ceases its presence. Quote 35. Wakefulness is anonymous. It is not that there is my vigilance in the night. In insomnia, it is the night itself that watches. Levinas deepens the notion of wakefulness during insomnia by portraying it as an impersonal force. The individual is no longer in control. Rather, it is the night itself that maintains this state of vigilance. In insomnia, one loses subjectivity, becoming a passive participant in an anonymous, watching presence that transcends personal agency. Quote 36. To sleep is to suspend physical and psychic activity. But an abstract being, hovering in the air, lacks an essential condition for this suspending: a place. Levinas introduces the idea that sleep is not merely the cessation of activity, but requires a connection to a physical place. Sleep involves a grounding, a relationship with a base, such as lying down, which allows one to abandon oneself to rest. The act of sleeping, therefore, is intrinsically tied to having a place to rest. Quote 37. Emotion puts into question not the existence, but the subjectivity of the subject. It prevents the subject from gathering itself up, reacting, being someone. Levinas explores the impact of emotion on the self, noting that while emotions do not threaten existence itself, they undermine the subject's ability to maintain their identity. In moments of intense emotion, the self is destabilized, losing its ability to act coherently, and subjectivity dissolves into a state of overwhelm. Quote 38. Place, then, before being a geometric space, and before being the concrete setting of the Heideggerian world, is a base. This is what makes the body the very advent of consciousness. Levinas argues that place is not merely a physical or spatial concept, but something fundamental to existence. The body's relationship to a place is what enables consciousness to emerge. This positioning is not just a symbol of consciousness, but the very foundation upon which consciousness and existence arise. Quote 39. The present is a halt, not because it is arrested, but because it interrupts and links up again the duration to which it comes, out of itself. Levinas describes the present as a unique moment in time that interrupts the flow of duration. It does not linger or stretch, but rather stands as a brief point where time halts before continuing. This moment of the present is not static, but dynamic, creating the possibility for subjectivity to emerge within the flow of time. Quote 40. An instant contains an act by which existence is acquired. Each instant is a beginning. a birth. Levinas asserts that every moment is an act of initiation, where existence itself is acquired anew. Each instant is a fresh beginning, not linked to the past or future, but rather a singular point where existence is claimed. This emphasizes the transformative and dynamic nature of being, where existence is constantly being reaffirmed with each moment. Quote 41. What begins to be does not exist before having begun, and yet it is what does not exist that must through its beginning give birth to itself, come to itself, without coming from anywhere. This quote highlights the paradox of existence. Something that does not yet exist must create itself through the act of beginning. Levinas touches on the mystery of creation, where being emerges out of nothingness, and the act of beginning itself becomes a foundational event without any preceding cause or origin. Quote 42. The evanescence of an instant constitutes its very presence. It is the condition for the fullness of a contact with being. Levinas suggests that the fleeting nature of each moment, its evanescence, is what allows for the fullest engagement with existence. The very fact that the present is transient gives it its intensity and depth, making each moment a complete and total encounter with being before it fades into the past. Quote 43. The cup of existence is drunk to the dregs, is drained. Nothing is left over for the morrow. Here, Levinas speaks to the totality of the present moment. In the present, existence is fully experienced, leaving nothing in reserve. Each moment is lived completely, with no remainder or potentiality left for the future. This image of draining existence reflects the all-consuming nature of the present. Quote 44. The being that is taken up is a burden. Here, what is called the tragic in being is grasped in its very origin. Levinas points out that to exist is to take on a weight, a burden that cannot be shaken off. The very act of being is inherently tragic because it involves the inescapable commitment to existence, which brings with it a kind of responsibility and heaviness. This is the origin of the existential tragedy, the tension between freedom and the burden of being. Quote 45. The present is pure beginning, but in its initiating contact, an instantaneous maturity invades it. It puts its pin in itself and is caught in its own game. Levinas describes the present as both a pure beginning and an immediate maturity. As soon as the present emerges, it is already shaped and constrained by its own existence, locking itself into place. This duality of the present, its freshness and its entrapment, captures the complexity of the moment as both a point of freedom and a trap. Quote 46. The tragic does not come from a conflict between freedom and destiny, but from the turning of freedom into destiny, from responsibility. Levinas redefines the nature of tragedy, suggesting that it does not arise from a battle between personal freedom and fate, but from the fact that freedom inevitably becomes bound by responsibility. As soon as one acts freely, they are caught in the web of their own existence, turning freedom into a destiny that must be carried. Quote 47. To be an ego is not only to be for oneself, it is also to be with oneself. Levinas emphasizes that the self is not just an isolated entity concerned with itself, but is also accompanied by an internal duality. This self-association creates a dynamic where the ego experiences a kind of relationship with itself, resulting in a tension that defines the human condition. This internal duality reflects the inescapable nature of being tied to oneself, even in attempts to escape. Quote 48. There is hope only when hope is no longer permissible. Levinas points out that true hope arises in moments of desperation, when circumstances seem beyond repair. Hope exists in the face of what appears irreparable, and it thrives in the spaces where despair might otherwise dominate. This paradoxical nature of hope underscores its depth, emerging only when it seems impossible. Quote 49. Pain cannot be redeemed, Just as the happiness of humanity does not justify the mystery of the individual, retribution in the future does not wipe away the pains of the present. Levinas argues that future compensation cannot fully erase the suffering of the present. The individuality of pain is such that it cannot be balanced out or justified by the happiness of others or by later rewards. Pain is deeply personal and irreparable, creating an existential tension that persists despite future consolation. Quote 50. To hope, then, is to hope for the reparation of the irreparable. It is to hope for the present. Levinas describes hope as a desire for the impossible, to repair what cannot be repaired. True hope does not merely look for compensation in the future, but seeks to heal the wounds of the present moment. This notion of hope goes beyond waiting for better days and aims at transforming the present itself. Quote 51. We believe that the I does not enter identical and unforgiven, a mere avatar, into the following instant, where it would undergo a new experience, whose newness will not free it from its bond with itself. Levinas explains that the self does not simply move from one moment to the next unchanged. Each new moment offers a possibility of transformation, where the self is not merely a continuation of its past, but is instead reformed. This concept of the I allows for the idea of personal renewal, where time offers a chance for the self to be reborn, rather than being permanently tied to its past. Quote 52. The freedom of consciousness is not without conditions. In other words, the freedom which is accomplished in cognition does not free the mind from every fate. Levinas states that while consciousness may experience freedom through its ability to think and perceive, this freedom is limited. The mind, despite its cognitive abilities, remains bound by the constraints of existence and cannot fully escape its fate. This restricted freedom highlights the tension between intellectual liberty and existential reality. Quote 53. How indeed could time arise in a solitary subject? The solitary subject cannot deny itself. It does not possess nothingness. Levinas questions whether time can truly emerge from a purely individual perspective. A solitary subject, he argues, is incapable of fully negating itself or creating the necessary void for time to unfold. This suggests that time, with its capacity for renewal and change, is inherently tied to the presence of others, implying that sociality and relationships are central to the experience of time. Quote 54. To have a time and a history is to have a future and a past. We do not have a present. It slips between our fingers. Levinas reflects on the elusive nature of the present, which continually escapes us while shaping our sense of past and future. Though we live in the present, it is fleeting and intangible, always moving beyond our grasp, highlighting the paradox of existence as something that is both anchored in time yet impossible to hold on to. Quote 55. An instant breaks the anonymity of being in general. It is the event in which, in the play of being which is enacted without players, there arise players in existence, existence having being as an attribute. Levinas describes how each moment introduces individuality into the otherwise anonymous flow of existence. In every instant, a new subject, or being, emerges, separating itself from the general concept of being. This moment is the genesis of individuality, where existence becomes personal and specific. Quote 56. A subject is not free like the wind, but already has a destiny which it does not get from a past or a future, but from its present. Levinas asserts that freedom is not absolute. Instead, it is tied to the present moment, where a subject's destiny is determined. This destiny does not come from external factors such as the past or future, but is rooted in the present, emphasizing the weight and significance of each moment in shaping one's existence. Quote 57. Consciousness is not just incomplete without its background of the unconscious, sleep and mystery. The very event of its being conscious consists in being by arranging for itself an escape hatch. Levinas explores the relationship between consciousness and unconsciousness, suggesting that consciousness inherently includes the possibility of retreat or escape into the unconscious. This duality, where consciousness creates pathways to withdraw from being, is a fundamental aspect of existence, revealing the complexity of human awareness. Quote 58. To take up existence is not to enter into the world. Levinas clarifies that existence does not simply mean being part of the external world. Instead, taking up existence involves a deeper relationship with being itself, preceding any engagement with the external physical world. This distinction separates the act of existing from merely being a participant in the world's affairs. Quote 59. The true problem of man's destiny, which eludes all science and even all eschatology or theodicy, concerns the meaning of the very fact that in being there are beings. Levinas concludes by stating that the core issue of human destiny is not about understanding external forces or events, but rather the profound question of why there are individual beings within the larger framework of existence. This mystery transcends traditional philosophical or religious explanations, pointing to the fundamental enigma of being itself. Existence and Existents, by Emmanuel Levinas, ultimately seeks to articulate the tension between the anonymity of existence and the emergence of individual identity. Levinas underscores the idea that consciousness is born out of a struggle against the amorphous nature of being, emphasizing the need for a subject to emerge and take responsibility in a world otherwise characterized by a formless existence. The book concludes by highlighting that this struggle is not merely philosophical, but deeply ethical, as it is through the act of asserting oneself in existence that individuals shape their relationships and responsibilities towards others, thus finding meaning in an otherwise indifferent universe.
Curious to dive into the mind of Emmanuel Levinas? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of existence and existence in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.